Welcome back to Beyond the Books. My name is Beth Price, and as well as being a PhD student here in LLC, aka the School of Literatures, Languages and Cultures at the University of Edinburgh, I am the host of this podcast. I get to take you behind the scenes at LLC to find out what's really going on in the world of researchers here. Today, Simon West is in the hot seat. Having worked as a teacher for many years, he's made the jump back to university, doing a PhD in creative writing. Passionate about telling stories of all kinds, his research explores voice in the novel, and speaking of novels, his debut has just been published. Hello.
Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome.
So, Simon, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
I always kick off these chats with a sort of pretentious question about your academic journey, but you are a PhD student.
Yeah.
With the definition of a mature student being anyone over the age of 25, which I find alarming.
That's very alarming.
It's alarming.
Although I am glad that I'm in that category of over 25.
It's a different experience coming to a PhD after a career rather than coming straight out of university.
Yes.
So when did you know that you wanted to do a PhD?
It's always lurked there in the background. I did my undergraduate in teaching at Murray House, went straight into teaching as a profession and had many years in there enjoying that. But I felt I left some sort of challenge or academic rigour behind. I didn't feel that aspects that I had enjoyed in study were still there to the same extent. I suppose the idea of doing a PhD was a natural follow-on from having done the MSc.
And you did your MSc in Edinburgh?
Yes, I did it in the same building with some of the same staff. So it's been a fantastic experience to deepen the study in the same place and to deepen some of those academic relationships as well.
That's very like me, actually. I came to Edinburgh to do my master's degray and went, wow, that was great. I don't want to leave. I want to continue working with these academics in these fields. It's a wonderful community. And then I was like, I could do a PhD. And here I am. Yeah,
that was quite similar to me as well, I would say. I enjoyed the rigour of the MSc, I enjoyed the creative process, and I enjoyed the people that I worked with as well. And I applied over a long period of time, and they very graciously said okay.
So then, if you did your undergrad in education and teaching at Murray House, was it then just a really obvious choice to stick around and come back to the University of Edinburgh for that master's degree?
Yes. Basically, I built my life in Edinburgh. I met my wife here, we started a family here, my children grew up here. The youngest has just turned 20, which is heading towards mature student.
Yeah,
which
something, isn't it?
It's alarming. I could be a mature student of mature students. That became life, the family and raising children. And there's certain things that we felt were malleable in that context and certain things that weren't. So we basically stayed in Edinburgh. It's a nice place to have to stay. I don't complain about it at all. So having done that, and then the children sort of getting up and off a bit, and then things easing off in terms of a whole load of other constraints, it then becomes, you then think, well, what's possible? It actually coalesced a little bit around COVID, and I think my wife and I sat down and we just evaluated everything. COVID felt like a junction of some sort, and my wife, who's a real kind of enabler and a real challenger, said, look, is there anything that you feel on the back burner that you just want to pursue? And I'd written as a side project this novel Abner, and I thought I'd like to pursue the writing. I said, well, maybe they do a night class at Edinburgh. And I googled it and I said, oh, they do a master's. And my wife just said, yeah, go for it. I applied, I was accepted onto that course, and I think that's led to this.
That's led to that. Oh, that's awesome. How has it been undertaking a PhD as a mature student with, I guess, a background in the real world as well, and not necessarily aiming to stay in academic research from day one?
I don't think I could have done it straight from undergrad to master's to PhD. I don't think I was the person I needed to be. There's no way of testing that, of course. But no, I've absolutely loved it. I've loved the challenge. I've loved, as I say, coming back to academia and reawakening that side of activity of the brain, I suppose. I love working with the people. My supervisor's fantastic, and other people I've made friends with amongst the staff, Jonathan Wilde, Miriam Gamble's been a great support. And my supervisors, Jane Alexander and Alison Stack, have been fantastic.
So what does a creative writing PhD involve?
The substantive part is a creative piece. It can be poetry. In my case, it's narrative fiction. On the narrative side, it can be short story or it can be long form. And I'm doing long form. Now, the nuts and bolts of it are that accounts for about 75,000 words to 80,000 words of the submission. And then the critical analysis is the sort of remainder 20 to 25,000 words. The critical analysis can be anything from an academic reflection, self-reflection of the writerly process, which is very close to oneself, all the way out to a completely abstract thing that has nothing to do with the creative work that you've endeavoured to complete. I'm halfway between. So I've chosen a critical analysis of existing works that has some sort of crossover with what I'm doing in my creative side.
So you're essentially writing a novel and a sort of master's length dissertation on some aspect of writing together.
Precisely.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a very different experience, I think, from a more traditional thesis where you're having to really work in the existing methodologies, the existing scholarship. What is the creative piece that you're working on as part of this PhD?
So the creative piece was a piece I started to develop on the master's programme. So the master's programme is a 20,000 word submission at the end, and that can be the beginning of a novel or a complete novella, I suppose, at 20,000 words. I'd started it, I set it aside. I didn't feel that I had the time to really develop it. It was growing as I was thinking about it more beyond the time that I felt I had to deal with it. When I submitted my application for the PhD, it formed the main part of my application, and it's based on a real-life event which I came across, absent-mindedly scanning through this and that. It was the landing of a meteorite in a place called Orgueil in southern France in the 1860s, 70s, round about there, and then the story of what happened to that meteorite afterwards. Now, as I've taken that as a germ or a spark of an idea, it's mutated far beyond that original story, but that's the idea.
Do you also need that analytical project outlined before you're in the door in September in year one of this?
Yes, that's the second part of the application. The major part is you have to actually give a synopsis of the novel that you're planning. And then the other part of the application is what is your proposed analytical work. Now, the minute you're in the door, that can change under discussion. Sure. Initially, I was going to look at how Cormac McCarthy handles time in his novels, and that went out the window quite quickly.
You have to have an idea, but it's not necessarily one that you're beholden to.
That's right.
So then, comparing the creative and the critical or the analytic writing, how do you do that? I can't imagine jumping between the two.
I thought I could jump between the two. I thought that one would be the antidote to the other, that when I was sick of being creative, I could be analytical, and vice versa. But no, it hasn't worked that way at all. I started that way. Of necessity, the first year I think is that way, because your first year annual review, you're required to submit evidence of both areas under development. After that, you can specialise in one area and leave the other one for later. However, since then, I've focused on the creative. I find that it's a bit like being in a marinade. You're marinating your mind one way, and it takes a while for the sort of flavours to infuse your thinking, and to then suddenly switch to a different way of thinking and to a different topic can be quite difficult.
Have you found that they fed into each other?
I hope so. I hope that my critical analysis and my sort of real study of that aspect of writing informs and defines some of my own practice as well, because I do write in quite a cold and a distant style. And the challenge is, okay, well, that may be the case, but what tools are there and what practices are there and what examples are there of nevertheless bending the text to your advantage one way or the other.
And then when you're writing analytically, could you tell me about the different frame of mind for actually sitting down and approaching the analytical?
So this is entirely my own experience, but in my experience, they are very different. I find that the analytical is a process of reading sometimes almost impenetrable text and getting an understanding of it. And that seems to form in a diagrammatic way in my mind. Sometimes I'll even do that on the paper, to understand and to build arguments across critics and across authors. And I end up with some sort of picture, and a path through that picture starts to emerge. And that then becomes what I then write. It's an expression of that diagram, and it's also a direction of travel through that sense of structure. Creative writing is not that to me at all. It's much more a sense of nurturing an idea, nurturing a scenario, nurturing a character, imagining them living and breathing and speaking and being in your mind, and then coming to the page with that story almost already present and presenting itself. Really, the genesis of it is much more out of the imagination and out of creative impulse.
And when you're writing analytically, you say you read until you write. I think that's quite common for anyone who's doing any sort of academic work. You read it, then you go, I've got it, I can write this down. Do you find that when you're returning to the creative work, you need to kind of put yourself back into creative reading space before you write, or is it easier to switch to just being creatively productive?
It's a bit of both, to be honest. I think you can lead a sort of a creative life. Again, this is all very, very much just personal experience. I find that distracting myself from my creative work is really helpful. Not thinking about it a lot is helpful. I've heard it put so many different ways. I personally call it the slow brain and the fast brain. The fast brain for me is that brain that's active when you're actually writing and you're sitting down and you're making word choices and you're choosing how sentences flow. The slow brain is that part at the back of your mind that suddenly gives you those aha moments. You're like, oh, of course. Oh, why didn't I see that before? And something's been ticking along in the back of your brain over which you have no control. That's why I call it the slow brain, because you can't tell it to speed up. I wish I could.
As much as a deadline would love you to.
Exactly. And it's those aha moments. And sometimes they happen after the deadline. Why didn't I see this? It's so clear, you know. And for me, if I've had a day's writing, that's very much front of brain activity, and I'm draining that slow brain almost to the point of exhaustion. And then to go away and to distract yourself seems to allow this slow brain, I call it, or night brain, or whatever you want to call it, to catch up and to do its thinking and to meditate on what it's meditating on. Listen to Mozart, watch films by Bela Tarr, or, you know, eat lots of licorice. Just to have a rich life, enjoy it, and have some sort of faith that somewhere in the back of your brain something's ticking over.
I wish that you could make the slow brain speed up sometimes, but yeah, I think you're right. Bolts of inspiration come when they come, and you can only do so much structured work around that.
And I find writing for me is a linear process, so I do sit down and I write the next scene. I do find that the PhD itself constrains the process somewhat, but I think by nature I am a linear writer. I was inspired by Tolkien, who said he wrote forward until he'd gone wrong, and then he would reverse until it was right again, and then write from that position. So it was a forward and a reversing all the time, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, questing his way in a sense through the narrative. And I think that's how I write. But I do find that it's like pulling an elastic band. It's only got so much give in it, and I get to that point in a day and I have to stop and let everything relax and go back, and, as I say, let the back of the brain do the heavy lifting for the next day.
So sticking with the critical writing side, all that I know at this point in time is that you're looking at voice in the novel.
Correct.
What does voice mean in the novel?
Really what I'm looking at specifically is third person absent narrator text. So it's this omniscient writer, but someone who's not a part of the diegetic of the text. They exist outside of the story that they themselves are telling. We can't locate the narrator. We don't know who they are. Were they a witness to these things? Were they a character within the novel? We can't be sure. We can't tell. And it's that limited third person. So it's one step removed from the theoretical idea of the camera being a narrative that merely records what's happening. It's one step removed from that very extreme position of a very pared down, stripped down text. Now, within that context, it's looking at how voice then operates, and voice being word choice, how things are phrased, the cadences, the syntaxes that are employed, and it's how voice nevertheless then operates at the behest of the narrator. So though the narrator is absent, their fingerprints are all over what they're doing. And it's the way that voice is then inflected, and what that inflection maybe then causes to operate for the reader, if that makes sense.
I think it makes sense. So it's the difference between a first-person narrator is, I saw this, I did this. A third-person narrator, in a kind of camera sense, is just almost documentary. This happened, this happened, this happened.
Yes.
This is more an insight into the character's feelings and emotions in situations.
Yes, exactly. So it's looking at, well, even though this narrator is keeping himself very distant and is not giving us a real insight into these characters per se, he can nevertheless infer or suggest things that aren't necessarily explicit in the text. And it's a bit like the marionette puppeteer. So we see the puppet operating on the stage, but really that's a hand movement here, a tweak of the string there, that's causing these movements. So it's the analysis is really looking back to the writerly process and thinking, well, why was it said this way? How does it operate?
Interesting. Dickens was paid by the word, which is why everything is so descriptive. What was the Three Musketeers author? Dumas,
yeah.
Was paid by the line, which is why there's all this dialogue. And these sort of very practical reasons for why particular things happen in novels and stories. So there's a very real market force in the voice saying you need to write this to hit that target market. It's interesting thinking about it from the creative side rather than that sort of output clinical side almost.
No, I agree with you. I think, and when you select text, you do take into account what are the influences on the text, if only then to get to the writer behind those influences and to look at the way that voice operates to serve the purposes of the novel and how it operates. And I think it's Jenny who says that voice can travel, that narrative voice can vary. And in my own work, I'm looking at two particular axes of travel. One is between statement and inference in a text. And a good example of this would be the sentence that says, the father told a joke, the boy did not find it funny. That's a statement.
So you know that the father did this, and
yes.
Then the boy...
He did not find it funny. Inference is to say the father told a joke, the boy did not laugh. That then invites the reader to fill the gap.
So did he not laugh because he was embarrassed about laughing?
Exactly.
Or did he not laugh because he didn't think it was funny?
Maybe didn't hear it. There's a gap that's left there for the reader to infer, very simply. And then the other axis of travel is between unqualified narration and qualified narration. The example here would be the father who told the joke and the boy who did not laugh. This is unqualified narration. Whereas if I wrote that the father told a corker of a joke and the boy did not laugh, I've qualified it.
So in that second one, we can infer more that he didn't laugh because he's not finding it funny, or there's like a kind of bigger barrier.
The issue is not with the father's joke. Although who is this person who's saying that it was a corker of a joke?
Is it the dad?
Exactly. There's another layer to this. So these are just two very simple movements in text that can either shut down or open space in the mind of the theoretical reader. Why is the author choosing to create these spaces or to close them down? What is the overall effect in the larger sense of what they're writing?
I always find it so interesting doing this podcast and getting to speak to people who work in such different fields. I'm a big reader. I just have never thought about it as a sort of science, or maybe not an exact science, but there clearly is a lot of theory and methodology and deliberate choice behind why things have a particular meaning or an implication, whereas I just read it and go, good.
Yeah, absolutely. So you should. Your point is an interesting one about there being a science to writing. To what extent is a writer aware of these practices when they're writing? And I would argue probably not a great deal. There's something innate in the creative process. There's something that's operating behind the fast brain. The slow brain is ticking away, doing its job. And then to come and analyse that, I don't know how heavily you can lean on whether this was something that was a considered decision to write in this particular way.
I really think we could keep talking about the sort of process and the diagrammatic thinking and everything, but we have other things to talk about. So we'll stick with creative writing and move on to Abner, which has just been published, which is very exciting. So Abner is your debut novel?
Available on Amazon.
So I have the blurb, which I've taken off, I think, the publisher's website. The world flooded long ago, further back in time than anyone can remember. A scattered humanity continues to carve out its existence on wooden rigs high above the sea and on wayfaring ships that plot their course on the currents of the ocean. The young Captain Abner has only just inherited his own ship when it is fatally damaged during a storm. Voyaging from rig to rig across the ocean planet, Abner learns there's more to survival than just staying afloat as he navigates hope, trust and fear to face an ultimate challenge at the terrifying, destructive edge of his world. Abner's just been published by a publishing house called Ambassador International. What was the process of publication like?
It was a long process. There were many rewrites, lots of editing. I picked up a copy of, I think it's the Writer's Yearbook, and then went online as well. And I gave myself a deadline. I started in the Christmas and I gave myself until the Easter to push as many doors as were open. And I just, day in, day out, just pushed doors and submitted to agents, to publishing houses that were taking submissions. And I think I probably submitted to about 40 agents and publishers altogether. And it was just around about the Easter that one came back and said, we like the beginning of this, because you only ever submit the first 3 chapters or the first however many thousand words. We like this, could you send us the rest? And of course you're nervous at that point. And then they came back and they said, yes, we'd like to take this on board. Now since then till now, it's been about 2 years. So there's a lot of time in between. The first thing is, you're a writer. I'm not a contract lawyer. I'm not a publicist. I'm not a marketing manager. And yet now all of these things have to be some sort of, I think, string to your bow. So I was lucky in that I had two very good friends and a screenwriter called Murray Watts, who's also a novelist of many years, and a good friend as well in Barbara Henderson, who is on, I think, her 10th, 11th or 12th children's novel in Scotland. And I was able to go to them and say, is this contract good? Is what they're asking of me here normal? And they were able to come back and say, yes, it's all fine, it's all good. My advice beyond that is that if you're looking to move into the world of published fiction or non-fiction, is to join the Society of Authors. And they are brilliant at looking at contracts and helping you with normalise what can sometimes feel like a strange experience.
So Abner is a middle grade fiction.
Yeah.
So what does that mean in terms of...
Well, that's an American publisher that has picked up the novel, and their middle grade, I think, is it's their middle school. In Scotland, we go to primary 7, they go to primary 5, and then they have middle school, which would be P6, P7, S1, S2. So what is that, 10 to 14?
Can adults read it? Because it sounds really good and I'd like to read it.
Yes, absolutely. And I just had a friend who's actually doing a PhD at the moment in a different department of Edinburgh altogether, who read it and it came back very excitedly. She thoroughly enjoyed it. So I would heartily recommend it to all readerships.
I think that the idea of age brackets can be really restrictive on reading.
I agree. And I think good quality writing is good quality writing. I'll read Winnie the Pooh consistently. Some of these things you return to again and again, and they're almost as fresh as when you first read them. You know, my own dystopian sort of author when I was a child that I just latched onto, and this was a guy called John Christopher who wrote a Tripods trilogy, not based on War of the Worlds, but quite separate, and then a whole other load of future dystopias. And I think I'm very much inspired by him.
Which leads very nicely onto what did inspire Abner.
I think John Christopher, as I've just said, inspired Abner to some extent, in that that's where my interest lies. Children put into difficult situations, basically. And beyond that, I don't want this to come across this way, but it was a reaction to some extent to Harry Potter. What I noticed as a teacher was when Harry Potter came along, there was a whole raft of fiction that was very similar to Harry Potter that was sort of conjured up at the same moment. And children were awash with fantastical, mystical, sort of spellbound, magic fiction. And what I started to realise was that these were great, and flights of fantasy are fantastic. However, what I was noticing a repetition of this idea that the solution to the problem was a spell, or an amulet, or some gizmo that you could find, if you could undo the riddle. What I was interested in, and this was almost a challenge, could I write a novel where both the problems and the solutions are hard-baked into the world building? So there's nothing added. There's nothing found in Abner. There's nothing.
No, what's the word?
MacGuffin.
MacGuffin, that's the word.
And there's nothing wrong with MacGuffins. My novel that I'm writing for my PhD has got a massive MacGuffin right in the middle. I can't think that there really is a huge MacGuffin in Abner. The problems are baked into his world and the solutions are baked into his world. And the question is, does he trust the solutions?
I'm definitely going to read Abner. It sounds really interesting. I'm curious as well. The blurb opens with "the world flooded long ago and a scattered humanity continues to carve out its existence." Is there any sort of climate change dystopia as part of this, or is it flooding as a pick because then you can have ships?
I think it's a bit of both, to be honest. There is, of course, tension and nervousness and anxiety around climate. And I think to acknowledge that in a piece of children's fiction is useful. But on the flip side to that, the reason I had it as being flooded wasn't so much that they could all gad about in ships, but I like a science fiction, or I like some sort of dystopia where really the world is basically normal, but one thing has changed. So if you think of Blade Runner, the thing that's changed is that suddenly you can make humans in the lab. That's the only difference in Blade Runner between then and now. And then what is the unfolding of that? How would we then react? What would humanity look like if that was the case? And in the works of John Christopher, it's similar. What if everything was normal, but an alien race suddenly appeared and quietly took over? And I think the idea with Abner, it was the idea of stripping it back. How simple can I make his world? And okay, we're just going to have water and we're going to have timber, and that's it. What would that look like? How would humanity survive in that context? And what would their behaviours be? What would their myths become? Would the tensions be the same? Would the ideals be the same?
Interesting. And then, did you have the idea for the setting or the characters first? This is always something that I'm curious when people come up with novels.
Definitely the setting. I started with the world and I thought, okay, how much can I strip this world back? I was getting very close to Kevin Costner's Waterworld, which is a film I don't enjoy, I have to say. It worries me when people say, oh, is it Waterworld for kids? And I'm like, well, in some extent, yes, but not really. So I like this idea of just ocean and ships. I myself never really read books about seafaring adventures when I was a child, so I came to it quite ignorant of what was out there and had to learn a lot about mizzen masts and poop decks and fore and aft and which way is stern and all that sort of stuff. But I really enjoyed writing it. But definitely the world came first.
And the characters were sort of fleshed out within that.
Exactly. And this is one of the strange aspects of creative writing, is that you start with a synopsis where you mention 3 names: Abner, Silas, and Jared. That's all you have at the start. By the end, there's something like 30 or 40 characters that you've written and who've come out of the shadows, populated this world. One of the other aspects about Abner, that this world, the idea of rigs, the reason I chose that structure was that it enabled me as a writer to have basically 4 little stories within a bigger story. Each rig is remarkably different. One is a financial centre, one is an academic centre, one is just life gone to the dogs, almost literally. And Abner is a continuation through the novel. He's a constant, but we do only meet these characters in these places. We get to know them and then we leave them behind.
I've talked about speculative fiction beyond the books before with Paul Crosthwaite, who is in the English Literature department, and he works in the economic humanities. So he's looking at speculative fiction from the point of view of, can novels predict economic downturns? The Great Gatsby, did it predict the Great Depression? Thinking about the idea of speculative fiction from that very literary, analytical point of view, fiction as being a way to speculate on something that's going to impact the real world quite directly. What does speculative fiction mean for this younger reader group? Because I'm assuming it won't necessarily be the same anxieties.
No, and I think what's interesting is when you're dealing with children, I've taught children down as young as 6. When you're that age, we've all been that age, and you're busy building your idea of the world. So you are speculating all the time. I had a brilliant comment in Primary 2 from a 6-year-old who confidently stated that it was impossible for it to rain on Mars. And I thought this was quite interesting from a 6-year-old, and I quizzed her a little bit about it, and she said it was quite obvious because rain goes down and Mars is higher than the clouds, so the rain can't get to Mars.
Cannot fault her logic.
No.
That is perfectly logical.
So it was a wonderful insight into that furious, energetic, never-ending sort of world building that children are engaged in, and you have to treat that with enormous care and respect, but at the same time it's fun to play with it. So I think that, in my experience, children engage with speculative fiction or fiction that plays around with reality almost in one hand whilst they're working out what the world is in their other hand. And there's a real energy there and a real kind of, you can have fun with that.
I hadn't thought of that before, but yeah, of course, they're trying to understand the world around them in a way that they don't necessarily have the tools or the factual knowledge. So of course it's speculative.
We are sense-making animals. We try to make sense of things, and that, all the way through our lives we do that. Children are definitely at the cutting edge of that activity, I would say, of making sense of their world. And to throw new worlds at them that sort of juxtapose their own experience or make fun of it in some way, I think is a very rewarding thing to witness and to be involved in.
And bouncing off of that, why does children's literature really matter?
It would be the same answer for any literature. Why does any literature matter? As we've been discussing, children are at that formative stage. To value the written word, to value language, to be enchanted by it, to be surprised by it, to be stretched by it, to hear other voices, and to have that as part of your formative existence, and to have your imagination stretched, I think. These are inestimably valuable, and all power to the children's literature world.
This has been a really, really fascinating discussion, but I always close off these conversations saying, what is your advice for students? What's the pithy maxim that you can leave them with?
I can only give advice that I need myself daily. It's not coming from any position of strength. But I got 2 quotes above my desk, to my right and my left, and if you don't mind, I'll give them. So the first is from William Shakespeare, from Measure for Measure. It says, "Our doubts are traitors, and make us lose the good we oft might win by fearing to attempt." And that for me really helps me to sort of deal with my self-doubts and my demons and my sense of I can't do this. At least try. And I think 9 times out of 10, when you do try, you realise that actually this is fine. But I think the worst thing you can do is not try. And then the other quote on the other side is by Ray Bradbury. He says, "You must write with zest, gusto, love and fun." And I've got those 4 words. And if you're not writing with at least one of those, go and have a coffee break and come back.
Very wise words from very wise people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
You're
this
welcome.
This has been honestly such a fascinating discussion.
Oh,
really
thank you.
appreciate
Thank you for the
down.
invitation. No, it's been fantastic.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Beyond the Books, and for Simon West for being my guest today. As a reminder, Simon's debut novel Abner is available for purchase now. You can follow Simon on Instagram as @writerwest, all one word, to stay up to date on that. If you've enjoyed this episode and you want to hear more from the world of LLC, you can find the rest of this series on YouTube. Search @the University of Edinburgh LLC to find our channel. For not only this series, but for series 1 and 2, which were hosted by Emma Aviett and Ellen Davis-Walker, head over to Apple Podcasts and search for Beyond the Books, or head to the university website, llc.ed.ac.uk/research/beyond-the-books. For now, thank you once again for joining me. Bye!